Welcome to the deep dive. If you're tackling the IGCSE business syllabus, or, frankly, if you're just curious about how businesses make really fundamental choices, you're definitely in the right place. Today, we're taking a deep dive straight into Part 1, Understanding Business Activity. Specifically, Unit 1, Chapter 1, Decisions on Location.
That's right. And this chapter, well, might sound simple at first glance, just pick a spot and set up shop. But understanding the why behind where a business operates is absolutely essential. It's way more than just finding an empty building. It's a real strategic puzzle.
Okay, so strategic. How does it link to the course itself?
Well, getting a grip on the factors that influence this decision is fundamental for building your skills in Assessment Objective 3. That's the analysis skill, the AO3.
Right.
When you look at any case study, any business problem, being able to analyze why they chose a certain spot or maybe why they need to move, well, that unlocks a much deeper understanding.
Understanding their costs, market access, that kind of thing.
Exactly. Their operations, their competitive position, it all ties back to location in some way.
Got it. So our mission for this deep dive is basically to study and revise the core ideas of this unit.
Precisely. We'll focus on the key ideas in the source material you've got, looking closely at those main points, the bold headings, the bullet points, to really see how these factors fit together in practice.
And just quickly for anyone listening who's doing IGCSE business, if you want more resources on this or other topics, you can check out www.igcse-business.weebly.com.
Good point. Lots of useful stuff there.
Okay, let's get into it. Let's unpack this whole location decision thing. What does the source material say are the big picture things we need to know?
So the source kicks off with the learning objective, understanding the factors that influence location, and importantly, relocation too, moving somewhere else. And it lists the key things to consider. This is basically our roadmap for today. Things like being close to your market, finding the right labor, getting materials easily.
Wait, even being near competitors, that sounds a bit odd.
Yeah, we'll get to that. It also covers the nature of the business itself, what it actually does. The huge impact of the internet, which has changed things massively, and then external stuff like legal controls, planning rules, and even things like international trade blocks.
Wow, okay, so it really is a whole stack of factors businesses have to juggle.
It is, and the source stresses that the perfect location doesn't exist universally. It totally depends on the specific business.
Right, like should you be in a busy town center?
Yeah.
An industrial park, near a motorway, by a port? Or out in the sticks somewhere?
Exactly. The answer is always, it depends. The source gives that great example straight away. Nuclear power stations.
Yeah. You don't find those next to the supermarket.
Definitely not. They need incredibly specific things. Really stable ground, huge amounts of space for safety. They're often away from big populations, maybe near the coast for cooling water. It just shows immediately how technical needs, safety, resources, they can completely dictate the location and limit the options massively.
Okay, that definitely sets the stage. So let's dive into those specific factors, the source details. First one up, proximity to market. Why is being near customers so important?
Well, what's interesting here, and the source points this out, is how much this varies. It depends who your customer is and what you're selling. For businesses providing services directly to people, think cafes, hairdressers, local shops, dry cleaners, being easy to get to is, well, it's everything.
Their whole business relies on people actually being able to walk in or get there easily?
Absolutely. Footfall, convenience, that's paramount. If getting to you is a hassle, customers will just, go somewhere else nearby.
Makes total sense. I'm not driving across town for a coffee if there's one on the corner. And the source mentioned traffic congestion being a downside too.
Right. That's a disadvantage of some prime locations, makes access hard. Which leads to that example of fast food places needing drive-thrus more and more.
Responding to that need for convenience?
Exactly. But proximity to market isn't just about individual consumers. The source also says manufacturers might need to be close to their customers too.
Customers who are other businesses, you mean, like in a supply chain?
Precisely. Think about supplying parts to a big factory, like in the car industry example the source gives.
Right, making components for the assembly line.
Yeah. A company making, say, braking systems might locate its plant literally next door or very close to the main car factory.
Why? Just-in-time delivery.
You got it. Cuts transport costs, reduces the need for the big factory to hold lots of stock, minimizes delays. So sometimes the market you need to be near is another factory, not a high street.
Okay, so it's about being close to whoever buys from you. Got it. That covers proximity to market. Next up, proximity to labor. Businesses need people, so how does that influence location?
Oh, this is a massive factor. especially for businesses where lots of people are needed, labor-intensive ones. You have to think about a couple of things. What are the general wage rates like in different areas? And crucially, are the people with the skills you need actually available there?
So if you need highly skilled engineers.
Then you might need to be near universities or areas where similar industries already exist, creating a pool of talent. But if you mainly need lots of, say, semi-skilled workers, the focus might shift dramatically.
To where labor costs are lower.
Exactly. And the source gives that really clear example here about manufacturers in the U.S. and Europe moving production.
Yeah, relocating to places like Mexico or the Far East.
That's it. And a key driver for that has often been accessing relatively cheaper labor. If labor is a big chunk of your total costs, moving somewhere with lower wages could give you a major competitive edge.
So it shows location isn't just about selling stuff. It's fundamentally about managing costs, too. Labor being a key one.
Absolutely. Finding the right skills sometimes, finding the right price point other times.
Okay. What about the actual stuff you use to make things, proximity to material?
Right. This becomes really critical if you're using large amounts of raw materials, especially if those materials are heavy, bulky, awkward, or just expensive to transport, or maybe they spoil quickly.
So locating near the source cuts down transport costs and maybe waste.
Precisely. The source mentions businesses using loads of water for cooling, maybe, or processing they might locate near rivers, lakes, or the coast.
Makes sense. Chemical plants, energy-intensive businesses.
Good examples. Energy itself can be seen as a material input. If your process uses huge amounts of power, being near a cheap or reliable energy source is vital. The source even gives that example of BASF, the German chemical company, expanding overseas, partly because energy costs were rising so much in Germany. Cheaper energy elsewhere made those locations more attractive.
Wow, so energy costs alone can drive global location decisions.
They definitely can. And speaking of needing space and resources, the source brings up different types of land sites here. It introduces some key terms: brownfield sites and greenfield sites.
Okay, brownfield and greenfield. What's the practical difference for a business looking for a place?
Think of brownfield as land that's been used before.
Yeah.
Often in towns or cities, maybe an old factory site, disused warehouses, that kind of thing.
Right, already developed. And greenfield?
That's land that hasn't been developed before,
Mm-hmm.
usually on the edge of towns or out in the countryside. Untouched land, essentially.
Okay, so what are the pros and cons of each, according to the source, from a location viewpoint?
Well, the source highlights the trade-offs. Brownfield sites might be good because they're already in or near urban areas, so potentially better access to workers, maybe even customers. But the downsides can be pretty big. The land might need a lot of expensive cleaning up if it was used for industry before remediation, they call it.
Contamination issues.
Yeah. And getting planning permission can be trickier, especially if it's near houses. People worry about noise, traffic, environmental impact.
Right, potential hidden costs and local objections.
Exactly. Greenfield sites, on the other hand, usually cheaper to buy, offer more space for big operations or future expansion, and might be easier to build on no demolition or cleanup needed. Often found in industrial parks or out of town.
But the downside might be
Less existing infrastructure, maybe. You might need to sort out new access roads, connect utilities, and you're further from town centers, which could affect labor or market access for some. It's that choice. Adapt an old site or start fresh on new land.
Okay, useful distinction. Now that factor that seemed odd earlier, proximity to competitors. Why would you want to be near your rivals?
This brings up a really interesting point from the source, and it's counterintuitive at first, like you said. But for lots of businesses, especially in retail or some services, being near similar businesses isn't bad. It can actually be a real advantage.
How so? Like a shopping mall.
Exactly. Shopping malls, retail parks, even streets known for certain types of shops or restaurants. They become destinations. Customers go there because they know they'll find multiple options.
Ah, I see. So the cluster attracts more people overall, more foot traffic to that specific area.
Precisely. It creates a pull factor, as the source says. You benefit from the customers your competitors attract, and they benefit from the ones you attract.
So you might compete harder once the customer is there, but you get access to a bigger pool of potential customers in the first place.
That's the idea. However, the source does note this isn't universal. If your business is really unique or serves a very local niche market, you might prefer to be somewhere with little or no direct competition nearby.
To capture the whole market in that area.
Right. So it really depends on your business model. Sometimes proximity is good. Sometimes you want distance from competitors. Shows how complex this analysis gets.
Definitely. Okay, that covers the proximity factors.
Yeah.
Now, the source moves on to how the fundamental nature of the business activity shapes these decisions. Makes sense. What you do changes what you need.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And breaking it down by activity type, like the source does, is really helpful. For services retailers, banks, cafes, salons, we've kind of covered it. Proximity and easy access for customers are usually top priority.
Footfall and convenience rule.
Pretty much. The source mentions again how traffic or lack of parking can be serious negatives. Hence, drive-thrus or retail parks with big car parks being strategic choices.
Okay. And for office-based businesses, they don't always need customers walking in constantly.
True. Offices, head offices, call centers, professional firms like accountants or lawyers, they need good access for customers and employees. So good transport links are key, and often the image or prestige of the location matters. The source mentions big global cities, London, New York, Dubai. They're expensive, sure, but they offer access to key markets, other services, and project an image that might attract clients or top staff.
So cost isn't always the main driver for offices. Image and access can trump it.
Sometimes, yes. Depends on the specific business.
What about manufacturing? Their needs seem all over the place.
They really are. Labor-intensive manufacturing might chase lower wages, like we discussed, but often manufacturing needs huge sites. Maybe special infrastructure, heavy power supply, water, waste disposal, and transport is critical. Getting raw materials in, finished goods out. The source gives those examples like power stations needing coal and water nearby, or oil refineries on the coast for tanker deliveries.
So access to motorways, rail, ports is crucial.
Very often, yes. That's why you find many manufacturers on industrial estates or large greenfield sites, cheaper land, space, and infrastructure tailored to their needs.
And agriculture. Seems obvious tied to the land.
It is, but even there, the type of farming dictates the specifics. You need the right soil, the right climate, water availability. The source points out fertile land for crops like wheat, maybe less fertile land is okay for grazing animals. And you can only grow tropical fruit like bananas in a tropical climate, obviously.
So location is defined by the environment needed. What about fishing or mining?
Yeah, the source gives the oyster farming example. You have to do that where oysters grow naturally or where the water conditions are right near the coast. River mouths usually. And mining, well, you have to go where the minerals are. Can't argue with geology. These show how the core activity can sometimes leave very little choice in location.
Okay, so we've got the traditional factors and how the business type shapes priorities. Now, for something that's really shaken things up, the impact of the internet. How has going online changed location decisions?
This is where things get really, really interesting. The source highlights a massive shift here. The internet, e-commerce. It means many businesses now rely way more on electronic communication, data transfer.
Rather than face-to-face contact or people visiting a shop.
Exactly. For businesses selling primarily online, that need for expensive shops in prime locations near customers, well, it's drastically reduced, sometimes eliminated altogether.
Because their market is potentially global, accessed via a screen.
Precisely. So the location decision shifts. What becomes crucial? Reliable, fast internet connectivity that's non-negotiable. And they often need huge amounts of space for warehousing, stock control, packing, shipping. Logistics becomes key.
So they might move away from expensive city centers.
Often, yes. Towards locations with cheaper land, bigger warehouses, good transport links for deliveries. The source even has that chart showing the massive growth in online sales, visually shows why this impacts location thinking so much.
It really shows how technology can just rewrite the rules. Okay, finally, location isn't just about business needs. Governments and laws step in, too.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Legal controls from local councils, national governments, they heavily influence where a business can actually set up shop, regardless of what looks good on paper economically.
Planning permission being the big one.
That's the most obvious, yeah. You can't just build a factory in a residential area or open a noisy bar anywhere. There are zones, regulations. Plus, environmental rules preventing pollution, protecting habitats, rules about noise levels. The source mentions needing to consult with local communities too, especially for bigger projects.
So you could find the perfect spot based on market, labor, materials, but still be told no.
It happens. But governments also use these controls proactively. They might offer incentives, grants, tax breaks to encourage businesses into specific areas.
What the source calls assisted areas, places needing jobs or investment.
Exactly. And businesses often have to do detailed viability studies to prove their plans are practical and won't cause major problems before they get the go-ahead.
Okay. the source also talks about trade blocks. What exactly is a trade block? How does that affect location?
Right. Simple definition from the source. It's a group of countries, usually in the same region, that agree to trade freely with each other. So they get rid of or reduce barriers like tariffs, taxes on imports for trade between the member countries.
Okay, free trade within the group. So why does that influence where a company sets up?
Well, imagine you want to sell your products into a huge market that happens to be a trade bloc, say, the EU, or that African continental free trade area the source mentions. If you set up your factory inside that bloc, it gives you a major strategic advantage. You might pay tariffs importing raw materials into the bloc, maybe, but once your factory inside the bloc makes the finished product.
You can sell to any country within that bloc without facing more tariffs.
Exactly. No internal trade barriers, which makes your products cheaper and easier to sell across that whole large market.
Like that example, the source used Japanese car makers setting up in the US and Europe back in the 80s and 90s.
Perfect illustration. Back then, importing cars directly from Japan faced big barriers. By building factories inside those markets, they bypassed those import tariffs for cars sold within the region.
Making them more competitive on price shows how global trade rules directly shape where companies decide to produce things.
Absolutely. It's a huge factor for international businesses.
Right. Lastly, the source looks at size. Large versus small businesses. Do they choose locations differently?
Generally, yes. Their resources and needs are often quite different. Small businesses, the source suggests, often choose based on practicality. Maybe close to their local customers or even just near where the owner lives to keep travel simple and overheads low, especially when starting out. Their space needs are usually smaller too.
Makes sense. Keep it simple. What about large businesses?
They tend to have much more complex requirements. They often need very large sites for factories, warehouses, big office complexes. They need serious infrastructure access, motorways, rail, ports. They might need specific types of labor or materials in huge quantities. And crucially, they usually have more money and bargaining power.
Power to negotiate for sites, deal with planning, maybe even get infrastructure improved for them.
Exactly. Their decision-making process is usually much more detailed, strategic, weighing up all these factors we discussed, often on a national or even global scale.
Okay, that gives a really thorough picture of all the factors from the source. Proximity, business type, internet, legal stuff, trade blocks, and size.
Yeah, it shows choosing where is this really complex strategic puzzle. Lots of interlocking pieces.
And figuring out which pieces are most important for a specific business, that's where the AO3 analysis skill comes in.
Precisely. When you see a business, ask yourself, why there? Are they prioritizing cost, access, skills, avoiding barriers? That's the analysis. It helps you understand their strategy, their advantages, their challenges.
Okay, let's quickly test our understanding with a mini quiz based on the source material we've just covered. Ready?
Let's do it. Fire away.
First question. What kind of business would be most likely to locate in a shopping mall and why, according to the source?
Okay, based on the source, probably a service business like a shop or a cafe, maybe a specialist retailer. Why? Because they benefit from the high customer traffic, that pull factor created by all the other businesses there.
Spot on. Okay, second one. According to the source, what's a key reason manufacturers might relocate production to countries in the Far East?
Yes, the source specifically mentioned lower labor costs as a major driver compared to places like the USA or Europe, accessing cheaper labor.
Correct again. Last one. If a chemical processing plant needs large amounts of water for cooling, where might it typically locate, based on the source?
The source said businesses needing lots of water would likely locate near rivers, lakes, or the coast to get easy access to that resource.
Excellent. So those examples really reinforce how different factors drive decisions for different types of businesses.
Definitely. You can see how location is this dynamic outcome, mixing internal business needs with all sorts of external forces, economic, technological, legal, political.
And getting your head around that interaction is so important for developing that analysis skill in business studies. Helps you see the why behind what businesses do.
Which actually raises an interesting question to think about after this. As technology like the internet keeps evolving, and maybe things like remote working become even more common, how might the balance of these location factors shift again in the future?
Ooh, good question. Will physical location become less important overall, or will different types of location become crucial?
Exactly. Food for thought. Something to ponder as you continue studying business.
Definitely. Well, we hope this deep dive has helped you understand this really core concept from the IGCSE business syllabus and why it's so central to analyzing businesses.
Remember, if you want more resources, check out www.igcse-business.weebly.com.
Thanks for joining us for this deep dive into location decisions.
See you next time.